I was sitting in my truck outside Hartwell's when Tim called. The building took up most of the view through the windshield. It was 9 stories of broken windows, stained concrete, and sections that had folded inward like someone had leaned on them too hard. A chain-link fence ran around the property. There were signs on it about demolition and trespassing, though most of the signs had been torn or faded by the weather. Beyond the fence, weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement. My phone showed Tim's name, then lost the signal before I could answer. It rang again. I picked it up. "Yeah?" There was a burst of static. Then Tim's voice came through low and rough.
Eugene?
"Yeah, I got you.
You still outside Hartwell's?
I'm looking at it." The signal broke apart again. I waited. Tim came back a second later, though his words sounded like they were traveling through a pipe.
I've got a job.
"What kind?"
Salvage, copper, fixtures, whatever metal comes loose before the wrecking crew gets there.
"When?"
Now. They start demolition in June.
I looked through the windshield at the upper floors. One corner of the building had collapsed into the atrium, leaving a dark opening that ran from somewhere near the roof down into the lower levels. It was hard to tell where the floors ended and the debris began. "How bad?"
Bad enough.
"That doesn't tell me much."
It's half collapsed. Power isn't dependable. 2 crews already walked.
The call went quiet for a moment. I could hear traffic moving along Woodward behind me. A bus hissed at the curb, then pulled away. Tim's breathing came through the phone. "What's the pay?" I asked.
Double scale.
"How long?"
Until it's done or until the wrecking crew shows up.
"That's not a length of time."
It's the length you've got.
I rubbed my thumb across the cracked edge of my phone. The mortgage was 6 weeks behind. Beverly had stopped leaving the past due notices on the counter because there wasn't any point. We both knew what they said. Leonard's medical bill was overdue too, and Angela still needed things that didn't look important until you started adding them up. Food, shoes, school costs. "I need the money," I said.
I know.
"You know because Beverly called you?"
No. I know because nobody takes this job for the view.
He never made a hard thing sound better than it was. "What's the catch?"
There's one condition.
"There's always a condition."
4th floor. Old bridal department. You leave the mirror alone.
I looked at Hartwell's again. I couldn't see the 4th floor from where I was parked, not clearly. "What mirror?"
Full-length mirror, bolted to a support column.
"And?"
You don't touch it. You don't move it. You don't clean it.
I wasn't planning on cleaning anything.
You work with it behind you. You never face it.
The connection crackled hard enough that I pulled the phone away from my ear. When I put it back, Tim was still talking. "Look, Tim, if you're going to put a rule on part of this job, tell me why."
Because it's dangerous.
"Everything in there is dangerous."
Not like that.
I waited for more. Tim didn't give it to me. I had known him long enough to recognize when he was avoiding an answer. He'd pause before the part he didn't want to say, then make the warning sound like the explanation. It worked on some people. I'd seen it work on me before. "What happens if I look at it?"
You don't.
"That isn't what I asked. If it shows your reflection doing something before you do, you leave." "How far before?" "Half a second, maybe less." I didn't say anything. Tim continued. "You leave right away. Don't go back for your tools. My tools cost more than this truck." "Then leave the truck too." "Tim," I said, "what's in that mirror?" "Don't face it." "Tim, if it moves ahead of you, you leave." "That's it?" "That's it." I looked back at Hartwell's fence. The gate was chained shut, though I could see tire tracks leading through the dirt beside it. Somebody had been getting in and out. "I'll take it," I said. Tim didn't answer right away. The silence was longer this time. "You sure?" "I need the job." "That isn't the same thing." "It is today." He told me where to sign the demolition waiver and said he'd bring the paperwork to the fence. A few minutes later, he came over carrying a clipboard. He looked at the building before he looked at me. The waiver was printed on several pages. Unsafe structure. No guarantee of power, personal responsibility for injury or death. I'd signed papers like that before. They always made it sound like getting hurt was a personal choice you made after reading carefully. I laid the pages across the hood of my truck. The metal was warm from the afternoon sun, though the wind coming off the street had a cold edge to it. Tim held the clipboard still while I signed. "Fourth floor," he said. "I heard you. Behind you." "I heard you, Tim." He nodded. Then he took the paperwork back and walked toward the fence. I called Beverly before I went inside. She answered from home. I could hear dishes moving in the background and Angela talking somewhere farther away.
You took it?
She asked. "Yeah."
How much?
"Double scale." She didn't say anything for a second. Beverly was good with numbers. She could take a number apart in her head and tell you what would be left before I'd finished saying it.
How long will you be gone?
"Until the work is done."
Eugene.
"I know."
The mortgage is 6 weeks behind. Leonard's bill is overdue. They called again.
"I know."
And you're taking a job in a building that's already half fallen down?
"Look, Beverly, I know what needs doing. I'll finish it and I'll bring the doubled pay home."
You don't know that.
"I'm telling you I will." In the background, Leonard asked if I was working that night. His voice was quiet. I heard Angela ask if she could wait up for me.
No,
Beverly said.
he'll be late.
"I won't be that late," I said.
That's not what you promised.
"I'm coming home." Beverly exhaled. It was the sound she made when she had more to say and knew none of it would change anything.
Be careful,
she said. "I will." I ended the call and sat there for a little while with the phone in my hand. Then I put on my utility jacket, checked the tools in the back seat, and went to the fence. Hartwell's was darker inside than it had looked from the street. Tim had set up temporary work lights on the ground floor, but they only reached as far as the old service counters. Beyond that, the store disappeared into shadow. Dust covered the floors and display cases. Somewhere above, wind moved through the collapsed atrium and made the building creak. I started at a service counter near the main entrance. The copper trim had been installed in long strips, and most of it came loose once I got the pry bar underneath. I cut the pieces down with snips and dropped them into a plastic bin. It was regular work. That was the good part. Metal didn't care about the building's history. It didn't care who had been there before me. You found the fasteners, worked them loose, and carried the useful parts out. I'd been at it for maybe 20 minutes when something scraped across a floor above me. It moved slowly, not a bang or a crack. A heavy drag that started somewhere over my head and traveled toward the far side of the building. It sounded like a piece of furniture being pulled across concrete by someone who didn't have the strength to lift it. I stopped with the pry bar in my hand. The sound ended. I looked toward the open stairwell. The temporary lights didn't reach it. The stairs rose through the dark with sections of railing missing. "Hello?" My voice went up into the building and came back smaller. Nobody answered. I waited another few seconds. The wind moved through the atrium, carrying dust across the floor. I figured that was what I'd heard. A sheet of metal, a door, something loose being pushed along by air. I went back to the counter and kept stripping copper. By the time the first shift ended, the service counter was bare beneath the temporary work lights, and the unanswered scraping had stopped above me. I left Hartwell's after the first shift and came back about 10 hours later. May 13th had started by then, though the sky was still gray. I'd slept for a few hours, showered, and changed my shirt. That was about it. The work was still waiting. I carried my tools through the fence and took them up the stairs. The building felt different in daylight, but not safer. The temporary lights were off on the ground floor, and most of the place was gray from the weak sun coming through the broken windows. Dust covered everything. My boots left dark marks through it as I crossed toward the stairwell. I'd spent the night on the lower floors, stripping copper from counters and fixtures. I'd heard more sounds above me, though nothing happened that gave me a reason to leave. The stairs were missing pieces in a few places. I kept one hand against the wall and went up slowly, stepping around loose concrete and strips of exposed wiring. The fourth floor took a while to reach. The building had shifted enough that some of the landings didn't line up right anymore. You'd climb what looked like a full flight and find yourself standing beside a wall where the next opening used to be. I found the bridal department at the end of a wide corridor. The sign had fallen off the wall, but the shape of the letters was still visible in the dust behind it. Bridal. There were mannequins everywhere. Most of them had no heads. A few had one arm still attached, though the hands were gone. They stood in torn dresses or leaned against walls with their plastic bodies scratched and gray. Some had fallen across the floor. One was lying face down beneath a collapsed display case. The wedding dresses had rotted in place. Lace hung from broken racks in long yellow strips. There were veils mixed in with the dust, and pieces of white fabric trapped under the glass from the display cases. The whole department looked like somebody had held a wedding and forgotten to clean up afterward. I kept the mirror behind me. Tim had been clear about that. I didn't face it. I didn't move it. I didn't clean it. I worked with my back turned toward the column and moved sideways along the walls whenever I needed to get past something. The mirror was tall enough to show a person from head to toe. I knew that because I'd seen the edge of it near the entrance. The frame was dark wood, bolted to one of the support columns. The glass looked clean compared to everything around it. I didn't look again. There was copper trim running along the wall beneath a row of old display windows. The fasteners were rusted, and the trim came free when I worked the pry bar underneath. I worked from left to right, keeping my shoulders turned away from the mirror. Whenever I had to shift position, I checked the floor first. The last thing I wanted was to trip over a headless mannequin and fall backward into something I was trying not to see. The department was quiet except for the tools. Metal scraping against plaster. The pop of a screw pulling free. Dust dropping into my hair and onto the shoulders of my jacket. I had stripped maybe 6 feet of trim when something caught my attention behind me. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a change in the light. A cracked piece of window glass lay on the floor near my boot. Part of the old display window had broken loose from the frame, and the shard was sitting at an angle against a chunk of concrete. The glass caught the daylight and threw it across the wall behind me. It also caught the mirror. I saw the reflection in the shard without looking toward the column. The angle was bad and the glass was dirty, but I could make out the room in pieces. The column, the broken cases, the mannequins standing around the department. Then I saw the bride. She was standing near the far wall, maybe 10 feet behind me, maybe more. The shard only showed part of the mirror, so I couldn't tell exactly where she was supposed to be. The mannequin was wearing a complete wedding gown. It had a long white skirt, a fitted top, and a veil that went over the shoulders. The head was still missing, but the body was turned toward me. One arm hung at its side. The other was raised a little, as if it had started to reach out and stopped. I stared at the shard. The real room was behind me. I knew what was there. A bare mannequin stood near the wall with its back turned. I'd passed it when I came in. It had no dress, no arms, and no head. The dress in the reflection wasn't on the floor either. There was nothing white near that wall except a strip of lace caught beneath the display case. I should have left. If it showed my reflection doing something before I did, I left. Tim had said it more than once because he knew I'd try to find a way around it. The mannequin wasn't my reflection. That was the first thing I told myself. I turned. Instead, I put one hand on the pry bar and turned my head, then my shoulders, then the rest of me. The mannequin was where I'd seen it. It was bare, headless, and facing the wall. The wall behind it was stained with water damage. There was a dark line running down from the ceiling, and a length of torn lace rested on the floor near its feet. The display case beside it had collapsed inward. Nothing was wearing a dress. I looked back at the window shard. The bride was still there. There were small buttons down the back and lace around the sleeves. The veil covered the empty place where the head should have been, though the fabric had pulled forward as if something beneath it was leaning toward me. The figure was facing me. I took one step away from the glass. The bride didn't move. Neither did the reflection of the room around it. If the image had changed, I could have blamed the angle or the light. But the shard showed the same broken department and the same dressed mannequin standing where the real one wasn't. I picked up the window shard. It was about the size of my hand, with one sharp corner missing. I wrapped it in a piece of torn cloth from the floor and put it in my jacket pocket. I faced the wall again and worked the pry bar under the copper. I didn't look toward the mirror again. I worked by feel when I had to, running my fingers along the edge of the trim until I found the next fastener. I used the pry bar carefully and caught each piece before it fell. The work took longer that way, but I wasn't going to turn around for a better angle. Every few minutes, I felt the urge to check the shard. I didn't. I kept my hand away from my pocket and concentrated on the wall. There were times when the building seemed to move around me. There was a low creak above the ceiling, then another one from somewhere along the corridor. I finished the wall. The last piece of copper came free with a sharp snap. I cut it down and put it in the bin with the rest. Then I picked up my pry bar and backed away from the column without turning my head. I kept my eyes on the floor until I reached the corridor. After that, I walked straight to the stairs. I carried the tools against my side and kept one hand over the pocket holding the glass. Outside, the daylight was stronger. The fence cast a long shadow over the pavement, and traffic moved along the street beyond it like Hartwell's was just another building people had decided not to look at. I stepped through the gate with the cracked window shard in my pocket and the fourth-floor mirror behind me. I didn't sleep much after leaving Hartwell's. I got home, showered, and spent a few hours in bed with the cracked piece of glass on the nightstand. I kept telling myself I'd throw it away in the morning. I didn't. By the time I got back to the fence, the sky had turned pale over Woodward. Traffic was already moving past the store, and the broken windows caught the morning light in scattered pieces. Hartwell's looked almost normal from the road. I had the copper in a plastic bin and the shard wrapped in the same piece of cloth I'd used the day before. The glass was small enough to fit in my palm. I kept my eyes off the side that had shown me the bride. Tim was standing beside the gate. He had a paper cup in one hand and his canvas jacket pulled tight against the cold. He looked at the bin first. "You get the fourth floor?" "Some of it." "How much?" "Enough to fill this." I set the bin down near his boots. The copper pieces had been cut into shorter lengths and packed together with strips of trim. Tim looked inside without bending over. He didn't seem interested in checking the work. "You go near the mirror?" "No. That isn't what I asked." I kept the cloth wrapped around the shard. I saw it. Tim stopped looking at the copper. "Where?" "In a piece of window glass. I never turned around." He waited. "It showed a mannequin in a wedding dress," I said. The real mannequin was headless and bare. The one in the glass had a dress and a veil. Tim put his paper cup on top of the fence post. He didn't touch the bin. "That's part of the mirror." It was a piece of window. It showed you what the mirror wanted shown. I held the wrapped glass up between us. "Then explain it." He looked past me at the building. The bridal department was hard to see from the street, but I knew where to find it. Somewhere behind the broken windows and the dark sections of wall, the mirror was still bolted to its column. Tim rubbed his thumb across the side of his cup. "Hartwell's had a bridal department up there, before it closed. Dresses, fittings, all of it. The mirror was part of the room." "That doesn't explain the mannequin." "No." "Tim." He looked at me then, not at my face, at the hand holding the glass. Julie Chandler was killed in that department. The name sat between us for a moment. I didn't know Julie. I'd never heard of her before Tim said it, but the way he paused before her name made it sound like the building did. "When?" 1961. "During the fitting?" "On the day of it." He picked up the paper cup again, though he didn't drink from it. She was getting ready for her wedding. Her fiancé came in and killed her, in front of the mirror. Why? Tim's eyes moved back toward Hartwell's. You don't need the reason. I asked for it. You asked what the mirror does. I'm asking what happened. That's the same mistake. I stared at him. Tim had a way of turning an answer into another warning. What did he do? He cut her throat. Tim said it plainly. I looked at the glass in my hand. The bride's veil had covered the empty neck of the mannequin. I hadn't seen a face, but I remembered the way the fabric had leaned toward me. What happened after? The store sealed the department. Sealed it how? They bricked up the entrances and covered the windows. They moved the racks and cases out through the back, then closed it. And the mirror? They left it. Why? People don't always remove the part that causes the trouble. It was bolted to a support column. They couldn't get it loose without damaging the floor and the column. Hartwell's didn't want anyone asking why the room had been opened again, so they built the wall around the department and left the glass where it was. I looked through the fence at the store. The wind moved a piece of plastic caught in the upper railing. It snapped against the metal and went still. They bricked up a murder room and left the mirror inside. That's what I said. Didn't anybody check it? People checked it. Who? Workers, inspectors, anyone who had a reason to go up there. Then why is the mirror still there? Tim turned his cup slowly in his hand. Because people who look at it don't always come back down. Traffic moved behind us. A delivery truck rattled over a patch in the street, and the sound faded toward the overpass. Tim continued before I could ask again. The mirror doesn't just show what's in front of it, it shows what's about to happen. A hand reaching for a door, someone turning their head, a person taking a step. Half a second early. Sometimes. That's what it showed me. What did you see? Not me. That doesn't matter. It matters if the rule is about seeing yourself. Tim looked at the shard again. You saw the room change. That's enough. I had the piece of cloth folded around my fingers. The glass pressed through it with a hard little edge. I could have put it back in my pocket. I could have dropped it through the fence and watched it break against the pavement. Instead, I held it out. Tim didn't take it. Look, I said, I'm not asking you to make this sound reasonable. I'm asking what happens next. If the mirror shows you doing something, you do it. That's not an explanation. It isn't meant to be. Tim, it compels you. The word sounded wrong coming from him. I'd seen the bride in the shard. I'd seen the dress where there wasn't one. But wrong and compelled weren't the same thing. How? You see yourself do something in the reflection. Then your body follows it. Right away? Yes. Even if I know it's going to happen, knowing doesn't stop it. What if I look away? You already looked. I didn't see myself. You don't need to. He took a sip from the cup. The coffee must have been cold by then, but his face didn't change. The last worker who faced it saw himself walk to the window, Tim said. He watched the reflection open it, and then watched himself step through. I raised my eyes toward the upper floors. The store had no glass left in most of the windows, just open spaces with bent frames and dark rooms behind them. He jumped? He walked. That's what you said. He walked off the building. The words were simple. Did he know what he was seeing? He knew enough to turn away. And then? He still went to the window. Did you see it? No. He looked down at the bin of copper. Who did? Doesn't matter. It matters to me. You want to work or you want a history lesson? I felt anger then. I want to know what you sent me into. You knew it was dangerous. I knew the building was falling down. I didn't know it had a mirror that made people walk out of windows. Now you know. That's supposed to fix it? No. He said it without any expression. Tim never dressed up bad news. That had been useful when I first started working for him. You could trust the bad news because he didn't waste time dressing it up. I put the shard in my jacket pocket. Tim watched me do it. You should get rid of that. I might need it. For what? to know what's behind me without turning around. That's not safe. Neither is the department. You leave the 4th floor. I looked at the bin. The copper was worth money, not enough to solve everything, but enough to make a payment and buy some time. Beverly would know exactly how far it went. Leonard's bill was already overdue. Angela needed shoes for school. The mortgage notices were still somewhere in the house, even if Beverly had stopped leaving them on the counter. Beverly had asked how long I'd be gone. Leonard had wanted to know if I was working that night. Angela had wanted to wait up. I can finish the floor, I said. Tim didn't respond. I'll work with the mirror behind me. I won't face it, won't look at the glass. I can finish the copper. You already looked. Not at myself. That's not the rule. It's the rule you gave me. He lowered his eyes. Tim, I said, I'm not going up there blind. I know what it does now. I know what to avoid. You don't know what it does. I know enough. No. I'm going back in. He stood there with the cup in his hand and the fence between us. For a second, I thought he might tell me to leave the copper and go home. Instead, he looked toward the building again. Keep the mirror behind you. I will. Don't use the glass. I won't. If you see yourself move, you leave. I know. Eugene. I waited. Don't go back for anything. I know what needs doing. He didn't answer. I bent down and lifted the bin, then held the wrapped shard out to him with my other hand. I'm not keeping this. Tim took the cloth and glass first. His fingers closed around it without looking down. Then he reached for the copper. He took the copper from me and turned away without meeting my eyes. I spent the next couple of hours going through the lower floors and checking what was left. Tim had taken the copper and the piece of glass, but I still had my pry bar, snips, gloves, and the small tool bag I carried everywhere. I figured I could keep working while he decided whether he wanted to tell me the rest. Hartwell's was quiet when I went back in. The afternoon light came through the shattered panes in thin gray strips, and dust moved through it whenever the wind reached the open atrium. I took the stairs toward the 3rd floor with my tools in one hand. The veil was hanging from the stairwell rail. It was white, or close enough to white that it stood out against the concrete. The fabric draped over the metal railing and fell down the inside of the stairs in a long, loose curve. One end had caught around a bolt. The rest of it hung toward the lower floor. I stopped a few steps below it. I'd cleared that stairwell the night before. There had been broken plaster, a piece of pipe, and some old wiring twisted around the railing. No veil. I would have remembered a veil. Even in a bridal department, you don't expect to find one floating around on the 3rd floor after the room has been empty for decades. I reached up and pulled it free. The fabric was damp. Not wet enough to drip, but cold and heavy in my hand. There was a faint smell to it that reminded me of old flowers left in a vase too long. I figured another worker had brought it in from somewhere and left it there. I rolled the veil into a loose bundle and carried it outside. I left it beside the fence near the place where Tim had set down his cup. Then I went back in. The 3rd floor had been stripped almost completely. There were bare counters along one wall and empty spaces where cabinets or display cases had been. I'd taken most of the useful metal out myself. The rest was cracked flooring, dust and debris underfoot. Orange blossoms were scattered across the concrete. They were small and white, with green stems and dark leaves. Some had been crushed under a boot. Others sat in little groups near the counters. They looked like they'd been cut that morning. The petals were clean. Water clung to them. I picked one up. It was wet enough that the stem slipped between my fingers. The room had been dry when I came through earlier. There were no working pipes on that floor and no rain coming through the roof. I looked up anyway. The ceiling was broken in a few places, but the concrete above was dry. I dropped the flower. A cake sat on one of the counters. That counter had been empty. I'd stripped it down to the surface the night before and swept the loose dust off with my glove. Now there was a white cake sitting near the far end, covered in real frosting. The frosting had started to collapse down the sides. A thin line of it had reached the counter and hardened there. I walked over and touched the edge with one finger. It was soft. The cake smelled sweet and sour at the same time. There were no crumbs around it, no box, no paper, no dust disturbed on the counter. It looked like somebody had carried it into the room and set it down carefully without touching anything else. I didn't eat it. I was hungry, and it was a cake. Then I looked at the frosting sliding down the side and lost interest. I went back toward the stairs. There were footprints on the second floor. They crossed a storage room that had been bare when I left it. The prints were small. A woman's shoes, I figured. The soles had left dark, wet marks across the concrete. Each step was clear enough to show the narrow heel and the shape of the front. The room itself was dry. I followed the prints until they reached the doorway. They crossed the room, turned near the far wall, and ended at the stairs leading toward the fourth floor. I checked the rest of the room. There were no other tracks. Nothing came in from the corridor. Nothing went out through the broken window. The footprints just stopped. I stood there for a while looking at them. Then I went into the storage room. The tools were arranged in rows. There were pry bars, hammers, snips, gloves, and a portable drill with its battery removed. Everything had been cleaned off and set parallel to the wall. The tools weren't stacked or thrown down the way people leave them when they're in a hurry. 2 crews worth, I thought. A hard hat sat beside the last row. The name Terrence was marked across the front in black letters. I'd seen it before near the service area below, though I hadn't paid much attention to it at the time. There was a dark stain inside the lining. I picked up the hat by the rim and turned it over. The stain had dried into the fabric. It wasn't large, but it was too dark and too even to be dirt. I carried the hard hat outside. Tim was still at the fence. He had moved the copper bin closer to his truck and was standing with his back to Hartwell's. The veil lay on the pavement between us. He looked at the hat in my hand and then at me. "What's that?" "I found it upstairs." He didn't reach for it. I held it out anyway. "You know Kingston?" Tim's face changed slightly. "Leave the tools where they are." I asked about Kingston. "Leave them." "Tim." He glanced back. The windows behind him were dark, and wind rattled the fence in short bursts. "Kingston Munoz," I said. "That the man who wore this?" Tim didn't answer. I looked down at the hard hat. There was a stain inside. "You don't touch the tools. You sent 2 crews in there before me. They didn't walk out of Hartwell's." He said it without raising his voice. "What does that mean?" "It means you leave the tools." "Kingston, did he leave on his own?" Tim's eyes stayed on the floors above us. "Tim," he finally looked at me. "You want to know what happened? Get away from the building first." "I'm standing outside." "Not far enough." The answer made me angry. I felt it in my chest and in the hand holding the hard hat. "You knew this was happening. I knew the building was dangerous. You knew workers had disappeared. Watch your footing. Look, Tim, I'm asking you a straight question, and I'm telling you to leave." "That isn't the same thing." "No." Behind him, Hartwell's creaked. It was a long sound from somewhere above the 3rd floor. Tim glanced back at the building, and for a second, neither of us said anything. Then he pointed at the storage rooms. "Put it back." "I'm not putting this back." "Put it back, Eugene." "You want me to put a stained hard hat back beside the tools and act like nobody was here?" "I want you to leave the tools alone. You're hiding what happened to them." Tim's mouth tightened. "They didn't leave Hartwell's voluntarily," he said again. "That's all you've got?" "That's enough." "It isn't enough for me." "You're still here." That stopped me for a moment. I was still there because I needed the money. The mortgage didn't care about the mirror. Leonard's bill didn't care about the footprints. I set the hard hat on the ground near the veil. "Tell me what that mirror's connected to." Tim's eyes moved to the veil. "Everything you found." The building creaked again. He picked up the veil and threw it over the fence. It landed in the weeds on the other side. "Go home," he said. I looked at the 2nd floor windows. "I'm going back in. I said. Tim shook his head. I know what needs doing. You don't know that. I know what I owe. He didn't answer. I picked up my tool bag and the pry bar. The hard hat stayed beside the fence. I left it there, with the tools still inside Hartwell's and the stain hidden beneath the lining. Then I walked through the gate and carried my tools back into Hartwell's. I spent the rest of the night inside Hartwell's because I didn't have much choice. The truck wouldn't start, my phone had no signal, and the temporary lights had gone out sometime after I came back in. I kept working with a flashlight until the batteries started fading, then found a place near the service area and waited for daylight. I got home the next morning and slept for a few hours. Beverly had already left for work by the time I woke up. There was a note on the counter asking me to call her. I put the phone beside the sink while I showered, then forgot about it until I was halfway back to Hartwell's. By May 15th, I'd stopped expecting the building to act like a normal place. I came back with my tools and a fresh set of batteries. The lower floors were dark, but the work lights came on when I switched them. I checked the truck before going inside. It started without a problem. That made me feel better for about 10 minutes. The day passed without anything moving where it shouldn't. I went through the 3rd floor again and found the veil gone from the fence. The orange blossoms were brown now. The cake had collapsed into a flat white mess on the counter. I didn't touch any of it. By evening, I was standing in the 4th floor stairwell with my phone against my ear. I'd been trying to reach Beverly since I left the house. The first calls rang without connecting. Then the signal disappeared. After that, the phone showed 1 bar, then none. I tried again anyway. The battery had been nearly full when I entered Hartwell's. Now the screen went black in my hand. I pressed the power button. Nothing happened. I held it down longer. The phone stayed dead. That was when the work lights flickered below me. The light came back for a second, then went out across the whole floor. Hartwell's dropped into darkness. I stood still and listened. Traffic moved along the street outside. Somewhere in the building, water dripped into a metal pan or an old sink. The sound came once, then stopped. I went down the stairs with my flashlight on. The beam shook across the walls as I moved. It wasn't fear. I was tired, and the building had trained me to pay attention to every small change. You didn't get to ignore things at Hartwell's. Outside, the streetlights on the block were out too. The stores across the road had gone dark, and the traffic signals were blinking red at the intersection. My truck sat behind the fence with the lights off. I climbed in and turned the key. The engine clicked once. I tried again. Another click. Then nothing. The battery had worked that morning. I'd driven from home and parked beside the gate. It wasn't old enough to fail without warning, and I hadn't left anything running. I tried the headlights. They came on weakly, then faded. I tried the key again anyway. Nothing. I got out and stood in the cold air beside the truck. There were still cars moving on the main road, but Hartwell sat in the middle of everything with no lights and no sound from inside. Tim kept a spare radio in the site trailer. It was an old construction radio with a cracked plastic case and a short antenna. I'd used it once during the first shift. It didn't reach very far, but it could reach the gate, and the gate was better than nothing. The trailer door was unlocked. That bothered me before I even opened it. Tim usually locked the trailer when he left, even if he was only going across the lot. He kept paperwork in there along with tools and fuel cans. None of it was worth much, but Tim locked up like someone who expected things to disappear. The radio was on the desk where he kept the work orders. I picked it up and checked the batteries. They were still in place. I turned the dial. The speaker gave me a burst of static. Tim was sitting in the corner. I didn't see him at first because the trailer was dark. The flashlight caught his shoes, then the black trousers, then the front of his jacket. He was wearing a tuxedo. It was a real one. Black jacket, black vest, white shirt, a narrow tie pulled tight under his throat. The clothes looked too clean for Hartwell's and too formal for Tim. I'd never seen him own anything like it. He looked like somebody had taken a man from a wedding photograph and left him in a job trailer. He was staring at the wall. Tim. His eyes moved toward me, but not all the way. They looked glassy, not tired, not drunk, just fixed on something that wasn't in the trailer. "What are you doing in here?" He didn't answer. I held up the radio. "The power's out. My phone's dead. The truck won't start." Tim looked at the radio instead of me. "It's almost time," he said. I waited. Tim. "Julie's been waiting 50 years for somebody to finish the wedding." He said it like he was reading a line from a form. There wasn't much feeling in his voice, but there was something underneath it. The glass had held that same stillness when the bride stood where the mannequin should have been. "Who is Julie?" He blinked once. "Julie. That's not an answer. She's waiting." "For what?" "For the ceremony." I stepped farther into the trailer. The door swung shut behind me, and the latch clicked into place. Tim didn't move. The tuxedo had a dark stain near one cuff. I couldn't tell if it was dirt or old blood. "Look at me," I said. He did. "The mirror did this?" Tim's mouth tightened. "It started before you." "Who?" "The crews. The workers you said didn't leave." He looked down at his hands. They were resting on his knees, palms open. "The mirror never let them leave." That was different from what he'd told me outside. He'd said they didn't walk out voluntarily. He'd said enough to make me understand they were gone, but not enough to put a shape around it. "Where are they?" Tim looked toward the trailer door. "Don't ask it questions." "I'm asking you." "You go near the mirror, you leave." "You told me that already." "Then listen this time." I gripped the radio harder. Kingston was one of them. Tim paused before the name. "Kingston. What happened to him?" "He was taken." "Taken where?" Tim stood up. He moved slowly and carefully, as if his body had decided before he did. "He saw the window." "Did he jump?" "No." Tim walked past me toward the door. "Then what happened?" "He became the groom." I caught the door before he could open it. "You said the mirror made him walk out." "I said he went to the window." "That isn't the same thing." "No." "Tim, what does it mean to become the groom?" He looked at me. His eyes were still fixed and bright, but there was recognition in them now. For a second, he seemed like the man who had stood beside the fence and warned me not to use the glass. Then he looked away. "It's almost time." He opened the door and stepped outside. I followed him with the radio in my hand. I didn't know if it worked. I didn't know if anyone was listening. But if Tim reached the 4th floor and turned toward the mirror, I'd be alone in a powerless building with no phone, no truck, and no way to call for help. The radio hissed as I walked. Tim crossed the lot without looking back. His boots struck the pavement in a steady rhythm. The black jacket moved against his shoulders, and the white shirt showed beneath it like a piece of paper. "Tim." He kept walking. "Tim, stop." He didn't stop. He reached the building and went through the opening in the fence. The stairwell was ahead of us, dark above the first landing. I followed him inside. The radio gave another burst of static. I tapped the side with my palm. It didn't help. Tim started up the stairs. "Listen," I said. "You don't know what you're doing." He kept climbing. "Tim." He put one hand on the railing. The stairwell smelled like dust, damp concrete, and something sweet that didn't belong there. Orange blossoms, maybe. Or flowers that had been left in a vase too long. Tim reached the base of the 4th floor stairs and turned toward the first step. I caught him by the arm and tried to pull him back. He stopped when I pulled on his arm, but only for a second. His body leaned toward the stairs like the rest of him was already somewhere above us. I tightened my grip. "Tim!" He looked at me. His face was calm, but his eyes weren't focused on mine. "You leave," he said. "You're not going anywhere. Not with me." "That's what I'm saying." The mirror slammed against the support column above us. The sound filled the stairwell. It was like a sheet of metal being dropped from the roof, only louder and closer. The railing jumped under my hand. Dust came down from the ceiling and covered my shoulders. Tim pulled against me. I held on. Then something moved in the dark below. The mannequins had been standing along the lower landings and near the old display rooms. I'd noticed them before, but not closely. Most were missing heads or arms. Some had been pushed against the walls with their backs turned toward the stairs. Now they turned. The movement came in pieces. A shoulder shifted. A smooth plaster head rolled toward us. One mannequin dragged its foot across the concrete and stepped into the middle of the landing. Another reached out with both hands and caught the railing. They were facing the stairwell. The lower routes were blocked. I let go of Tim. He went up at once. He didn't run, but he moved faster than he had before. His boots hit the steps with the same steady rhythm they'd had outside the trailer. He still held himself like a man going somewhere he'd agreed to go. I followed with the radio in one hand. The other stayed on the railing. I looked down once and saw the mannequins gathered below us. Their pale faces caught the weak light from my flashlight. A few of them had no faces at all, just flat plaster where the eyes and mouths should have been. "Tim," I said. "Stop." He didn't stop. The mannequin nearest the landing raised one arm and placed its hand across the stairwell opening. It wasn't fast. It moved like there was no reason to hurry. I climbed after Tim. The landing on the 4th level opened into the bridal department. The temporary lights stopped short of it, and my flashlight showed only pieces of the room. Empty counters, torn curtains, the dark outlines of display cases. The mirror stood against the support column at the far end. Tim walked straight toward it. The mirror was flat now. Its frame sat tight against the column, and the glass filled from floor to ceiling. I'd seen it from the side before. I'd seen pieces of it in broken windows. The glass showed the room as it had been. There were dresses hanging from racks. White fabric covered the counters. Small lamps burned along the walls. The floor looked clean enough to reflect the light. It was Hartwell's, but it wasn't the Hartwells I knew. The department had been put back together inside the mirror. A wedding was taking place there. I could see people seated beyond the edge of the frame. They all faced the front, though none of them moved. A man stood beside the mirror's center line with his hands folded in front of him. He wore a dark suit. A woman stood next to him in a white wedding gown with a veil over her hair. Julie. I knew it before I saw the name anywhere. I had never met her, but the room carried her the way the building carried old smoke and dust. She was the bride from the glass. The scar at her throat showed beneath the veil, thin and dark against her skin. There was an empty place beside her. Tim reached the edge of the mirror. Tim. He kept walking. The empty place had been waiting for him. There was room beside Julie, a clean space between her and the other people in the reflected department. The other people had left the space beside her empty. Tim stepped toward it. I crossed the room and grabbed him from behind. My arm went around his chest and I pulled as hard as I could. He was lean, but I couldn't get a good grip on him through the tuxedo. His boots dragged over the concrete. For half a second I thought I had him. Then the mirror moved before I did. My reflection was standing behind Tim. It had one hand reaching for him. The reflected hand closed around his shoulder before my own arm finished pulling him back. I watched it happen. I watched myself shove him. The motion reached me a moment later. My arm tightened around Tim, then my shoulder turned, and my hand drove into the middle of his back. I didn't choose to do it. Tim stumbled forward. His heel caught on a strip of broken flooring, and he threw one hand out to catch himself. I tried to pull him back, but my arm kept moving. The force went through me like I was operating a tool I couldn't set down. Tim fell against the space in front of the mirror. I got control of my hand then. It happened all at once. My fingers opened. My shoulder stopped. I leaned forward and caught the back of his jacket. "Tim." He twisted around. "Don't touch me. You're not going in there. I'm already there." "No." I pulled him backward. The mirror rippled. It didn't break. The surface bent around the place where Tim's hand had touched it. The wedding inside the glass stayed still, but Julie turned her head toward us. Her eyes found me through the reflection. She raised one hand. The hand passed through the mirror. It came out slowly at first, wrist and fingers pushing through the glass as if the surface were thick water. Her sleeve followed. White fabric, pale skin, a thin silver ring on one finger. The hand reached for the nearest man. That was me. I pulled Tim toward my chest and stepped back. Julie's fingers stretched across the space between us. They were close enough that I could see the dirt beneath one fingernail. Then the mannequins moved. They came from behind us and from the sides of the room. I hadn't heard them cross the floor. One seized Tim's left arm. Another took his right. A third locked both hands around his waist. The plaster fingers pressed into the tuxedo. Tim looked at me. Eugene. I grabbed him around the middle. The radio dropped from my hand and struck the floor. Static poured out of it. I planted my boots and pulled backward as the mannequins dragged him ahead. They pulled harder than I could. They didn't have muscles. They didn't have faces that could strain or mouths that could breathe. Their arms stayed straight as they pulled him toward the glass. Tim's shoes scraped against the concrete. Help me. I've got you. I had my arms around him and both hands locked together over his stomach. The tuxedo fabric was smooth beneath my fingers. I pulled until my back hurt. The mannequin holding his left arm twisted him sideways. His shoulder jerked, and his head struck the side of one of the empty display cases. Tim. Eugene, help me. I'm helping you. I pulled again. For a moment, Tim stopped moving. His boots caught against the edge of the floor where the bridal department had sunk lower than the hallway. I thought I could get him free. Then more hands closed around him. They came from the darkness near the racks. White hands, gray hands. Some belonged to mannequins with heads. Some reached out from bodies that had no heads at all. They took hold of Tim's jacket, his arms, his legs. The combined pull tore him out of my grip. My fingers slipped across the back of his shirt. I caught the edge of his jacket and held on. The fabric stretched under the weight. A button popped free and bounced over the concrete. Tim. He was almost at the mirror. His face had changed now. The calm was gone. He finally understood what was happening. Don't let it take me. I'm not letting go. The jacket tore. I fell backward with a piece of black cloth in my hand. Tim slid toward the mirror and reached for me. His fingers closed around empty air. Julie's hand was still outside the mirror. It moved past him. The mannequins dragged Tim forward. His boots crossed the edge of the glass, and the surface opened around them. It rippled up his legs and over his waist. The tuxedo darkened as it passed through, like the reflection was soaking into the cloth. Tim shouted my name once more. Then the mirror took the rest of him. His shoulders went through. His head turned toward me. I saw his face beside Julie's, close enough that she could have touched him. The reflected wedding waited around them. Nobody in the seats moved. Tim disappeared into the glass beside Julie. The surface settled. The mannequins stood still around the room again. The mannequins were still scattered around the room. The power came back a second later. The lights below us flashed on, then filled the stairwell with a weak yellow glow. The radio on the floor crackled once more, then went quiet. I didn't pick it up. I was looking at the mirror. Tim was gone. Julie was gone too. The glass showed only the room as it was now. Empty counters, torn curtains, dust along the floor. The mirror looked ordinary again. I waited for it to move. It didn't. Their backs faced the mirror now, like they'd finished whatever they came to do. I couldn't tell if they could see me. I had no idea whether they'd ever been alive enough to see anything. I went for the stairs. I didn't bother with the radio. I ran down the first flight, then the next one, keeping one hand on the railing so I wouldn't lose my footing. The mannequins didn't follow me. At least I didn't hear them. My boots hit the steps hard, jarring my knees, but I kept going. The floors below were lit again. The work lights came on one at a time as I passed them. Their cords ran along the concrete and disappeared into dark corners. I crossed the service area and pushed through the gap in the fence. My truck was where I'd left it. The headlights came on when I opened the door. I climbed in, turned the key, and the engine started on the first attempt. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. I backed away from Hartwell's and drove until I found a place with a working phone. There was a city office still open for reports and emergencies. I told them Tim had gone into the building and didn't come back out. The person on the other end asked if I'd seen him leave. No.
Did you search the building?
I was with him. That answer made things quiet for a moment. I explained that the power had gone out, the truck had failed, and Tim had gone upstairs while I was trying to get help. I said I lost sight of him near level 4. I left out the mirror. I left out the mannequins. I left out the wedding and the woman who had reached through the glass. I'd been inside when Tim disappeared. They asked if Tim had been drinking or using anything. I wasn't sure. They asked if we'd argued. I said we'd had a disagreement about the work. That part was true. A report was taken. Someone said a crew would check the site in the morning. I gave them my name and number. Then I drove home. Beverly was awake when I got there. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a sweater pulled around her shoulders. The light above the stove was on, and there was a glass of water near her hand. She looked at my face first. Then she looked at my jacket. What happened? Tim went missing. She paused. Where? Hartwell's. You were with him? Yes. She pushed the water away without drinking it. Then she asked if I was hurt. I told her no. That was mostly true. My back hurt from pulling against the mannequins, and my hands were cut from the glass and the rough concrete, but none of it needed a hospital. She wanted to know what happened. I told her the power went out and Tim went upstairs. I said I followed him, then lost him in the dark. Did you call the police? I called the city. Why the city? It's a demolition site. They handle the property. That doesn't answer me. I looked at the table. There were unpaid envelopes beside the salt shaker. One was from the mortgage company. Another had Leonard's name on it. I gave them the report, I said. Beverly watched me for a while. She didn't believe I'd told her everything. She knew me too well for that. Still, she didn't keep asking. The paycheck came through a few days later. It was double the amount I expected. Tim had said double scale changed the conversation. I'd thought he meant the danger came with a higher rate. I hadn't understood that the money might arrive whether the work was finished or not. I used it before I could change my mind. The mortgage arrears were paid first. The confirmation came through on my phone while Beverly stood beside me at the counter. She checked the amount, then checked it again. She didn't smile. The mortgage had been behind long enough that paying it didn't feel like winning anything. It felt like stopping something from getting worse. Leonard's medical bill took the rest of what it needed. There was still some money left, but not enough to make us comfortable. It would cover groceries and keep the lights on for the next month. Leonard asked if that meant he could go back to the doctor. It means the bill's paid, I told him. Does that mean I'm better? No, it means we can deal with it. He nodded, though I could tell that wasn't the answer he wanted. He said he was okay. He used that word whenever he thought he was causing trouble. Angela was sitting on the floor near the couch with a piece of paper in her lap. She'd drawn a tall building with black windows and a red line across the top. I asked what it was. A house, she said. It looks like Hartwell's. She covered part of the drawing with her hand. It's not. Beverly looked over at her. Angela lowered the paper and asked if Tim was coming back. I couldn't say. She asked why he was missing. I said the building was dangerous. Dangerous like a fire? Something like that. Is the mirror still there? I looked at Beverly. Angela kept watching me. No, I said. That was the first lie I told at home. It wasn't the last. Hartwell's stayed standing for another few weeks. The city put up more fencing and posted new signs. Nobody let me go back inside. I was asked a few questions by people who wanted to know where Tim had gone, and I gave them the same answer each time. He went upstairs. I followed him. The power failed. I lost sight of him. I didn't mention the wedding section. I didn't mention the people I'd seen on an otherwise empty floor. I didn't mention Kingston either, even though I still thought about the hard hat near the fence and the dark stain under its lining. By June, the demolition crew arrived. I watched from across the street with my hands in my jacket pockets. The machines worked through the morning, tearing open the outer walls and dropping sections of Hartwell's into the floors below. Concrete broke apart. Windows burst outward. Dust rolled across the road and covered the parked cars. The building came down in pieces. It took most of the day. The top floor collapsed near the end. The department with the wedding displays fell inward, taking the support column and the rooms around it with it. I expected the mirror to appear in the rubble. Even broken, it should have been there. A frame, a sheet of glass, something. They found glass dust instead. There was no body, no tuxedo, no mannequins, no intact mirror. The workers cleared the debris and loaded it into trucks. Hartwell's became a flat stretch of broken concrete and twisted metal. People drove past it without slowing down. The city closed the file after a while. Tim was listed as missing. Nothing more could be determined. At home, the money made things quieter. Beverly stopped opening the mortgage letters with both hands. The bill was no longer sitting under the salt shaker. Angela went back to drawing houses that looked like houses. I still woke up some nights expecting to hear the radio hiss. I didn't tell Beverly where the paycheck came from. I told her Tim had approved extra hours before he disappeared. That was close enough to the truth that I could say it without stopping. She didn't ask why a missing man had paid me in advance. The paid bill arrived in the mail near the end of the month. Leonard's name was printed across the top, followed by a balance of 0. Beverly set it on the counter while she sorted the rest of the mail. I picked it up and read the amount. Then I placed the receipt beside the mortgage payment confirmation at home. For about 90 days, the receipt stayed on the counter beside the mortgage confirmation. Beverly moved them whenever she cleaned, then put them back in the same place. I didn't ask her to. She seemed to understand that I needed them in sight. Hartwell's was gone by then. The lot had been cleared and fenced again, this time with newer signs and heavier locks. The city stopped calling about Tim. His name came up less often at home, too. The envelope arrived late in the afternoon. Beverly brought the mail in while I sat at the kitchen table. She dropped the bills beside me and kept one envelope in her hand. "This is for you," she said. I looked at it. My name was written across the front in black ink. I knew the handwriting before I turned it over. Tim had written work orders, supply lists, and payment amounts in that same narrow block print. The letters leaned slightly to the right. He pressed hard enough that the paper always had marks on the back. I hadn't seen his handwriting since the last day at Hartwell's. "Who sent it?" Beverly asked. I opened the envelope with my thumb. There was no return address. Inside was a wedding invitation. It was plain white cardstock with a thin black border. There were no flowers or decorations. The words were printed in the middle, but the rest had been filled in by hand. My name was written at the top. Beneath it was an invitation to attend a wedding. There was no bride's name. No groom's name either, unless mine was supposed to cover that part. The card asked for an RSVP and left a blank line for the location. No date, no time, no address. Beverly stood on the other side of the table and watched me read it. "Who is it from?" "Tim." She looked at the card. "That doesn't say Tim. I know his handwriting. Tim is missing." "I know that too." She took the invitation from me and read it herself. Her eyes moved over the printed words, then down to the empty line where a place should have been written. She turned the card over. The back was blank. "Maybe somebody found his things," she said. "Maybe." Did the city send this? No. Then who did? I didn't have an answer. That was the problem with most questions about Hartwell's. The building had always had an answer. It just wasn't one that helped. Beverly put the card on the counter beside the paid bills. She didn't throw it away. I didn't tell her to. That night I brushed my teeth and looked into the bathroom mirror. I saw myself standing there in my thermal shirt with a toothbrush in my hand. My reflection was wearing a black tuxedo. I stopped moving. The reflection kept its arm raised. The white shirt and narrow tie were the same ones Tim had worn in the trailer. The jacket fit close across the shoulders. I'd never owned a tuxedo, and I'd never worn one. Even for our wedding, I'd worn a dark suit that didn't fit right around the neck. The reflection lowered the toothbrush. I didn't. It moved a moment before I did, maybe half a second. My hand came down after its hand had stopped. The reflected man looked at me through the glass. Then he looked normal again. I stayed there, listening to the house. The bathroom fan rattled above me. Water ran somewhere inside the wall. Everything else in the house sounded ordinary, which made the mirror worse. I turned off the light and left the bathroom. Beverly was in the bedroom folding clothes. She had the television on low, but she wasn't watching it. She looked up when I came through the door. What happened? Nothing. Eugene. I stopped beside the bed. The mirror moved first. She waited. It showed me in a tuxedo. Her hand stopped on one of Leonard's shirts. What do you mean it showed you? Exactly what I said. Was it a reflection? Yes. Then how did it move first? I don't know. She set the shirt down and came into the bathroom. I followed her. The mirror showed both of us standing in the doorway. Beverly had one hand at her side. Her reflection had the same hand raised toward the glass. Beverly saw it. Her reflection lowered its hand. Beverly didn't move. She stepped backward and hit the door frame. The reflection stayed close to the mirror. For 1 second, it looked like the reflected version of her was standing in front of us instead of behind the glass. Then it turned normal. Beverly looked at me. She didn't ask if I was tired. She didn't ask if I'd been drinking. Those were the questions people asked when they wanted the explanation to be easy. Was that the same thing? She said. I think so. Think? It happened fast. She looked at the mirror again. Where did the tuxedo come from? Tim had one. I know. He wore it at Hartwell's. Beverly folded her arms. You said he was wearing a tuxedo when he disappeared? I hadn't told her that part. I told her the power had failed and Tim had gone upstairs. I didn't say that. No, you didn't. The house stayed quiet around us. The invitation was still on the kitchen counter. I could see its corner from the bedroom doorway. Beverly asked if the mirror had done anything else. I told her no. She asked if I had touched it. I said no. She asked if it happened only in the bathroom. I wasn't sure yet. We checked the other mirrors. The small one near the front door showed me in the tuxedo before I reached it. The glass over the dresser did the same thing when I crossed the bedroom. It didn't matter if I walked slowly or stopped without warning. Sometimes it only shifted its weight. Sometimes it turned its head. Once in the hallway, it lifted a hand toward the empty space beside it. Beverly didn't speak after that. She covered the hallway mirror with a blanket. Then she covered the dresser mirror and left the bathroom door shut. I helped her with the last one. The fabric hung loose over the glass and moved slightly whenever the heat came on. For the rest of the night, we avoided looking at anything that could reflect us. The dark television screen, the microwave door, the window over the sink after the kitchen lights were turned off. There were more mirrors in the house than I'd ever paid attention to. Most of them were small enough to ignore. The next morning, the invitation was still on the counter. Beverly picked it up while she made coffee. She read it again and held it out to me. You have to answer it. There's no address. There's an RSVP. There's nowhere to send it. Then call somebody. Who? She looked at the card. The handwriting was still Tim's. It hadn't blurred or changed overnight. "I don't know," she said. I kept the invitation on the counter for the next few days. I didn't mark yes or no. Beverly asked once if I was going to get rid of it. No. Why not? Because I don't know what happens if I do. She didn't argue with that. She put the card back beneath the salt shaker instead. The mirrors kept moving ahead of me. It became easier to notice when I wasn't looking directly at them. A change in the corner of the glass. A shoulder turning in the dark. A man in a black jacket standing where I'd been standing a moment before. I still worked. I paid the bills. Leonard's balance stayed at 0, and the mortgage was no longer behind. Angela stopped asking about Hartwell's. Beverly kept the house running the way she always had, though she stopped cleaning the bathroom mirror. One night, I stood in front of it with the light on. The reflection showed the same room, the same white sink, the same cabinet with the loose handle, the same man in the tuxedo waiting on the other side of the glass. I stayed still. The reflected groom faced the empty space beside him. I watched him wait there, beside the place where someone should have been, while the invitation remained unanswered on the kitchen counter.